Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Culturama February. And we're talking with Stephanie Hammer today. And we're going to talk about all sorts of things, including her latest book, which is Rescue Plan, which is a novella, and it's absolutely brilliant novella. I read it again this morning and just loved it. And it comes from this, it comes from part of a larger project, I think. Am I right in that? And the city of narrow interiors. And narrow interiors, as I was reading it this morning again, I was thinking, man, this is kind of a strange place. It's almost, with all the references, with all the stuff going on, it feels almost like a purgatory space. You know, we've got people, all these different cultural influences coming together. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
That's such an interesting way of thinking about narrow interior. That is not something that has ever occurred to me, to think about it as a purgatorial space. But in some ways, that's absolutely true. It's narrow interior was originally, when I first started thinking about it, was a town loosely based on the town of Northampton, Massachusetts, which is where I went to college.
Mm.
But it, as all fiction writers know, you start with an idea and then it just begins to morph and it takes on these other layers. So it's kind of become this beleaguered yet not unprivileged space. It's in the Northeast. It's not too far from New York. But it's also got little pieces of Olympia, Washington in it. It's got kind of university towns. It's got a little bit of Claremont in it. Also, in terms of, it has a quite wealthy college that's there, and then you've got wealthy-ish people coming for the weekend, and then you've got local people who are considerably less privileged. So it's a kind of a weird mixture of things, and it does have a hidden history that you glimpse a little bit in Rescue Plan.
Okay. We were talking earlier today about finding joy in our writing, and your writing is often joyful, and you are also one of the more joyful people that I know. And I'm wondering, just let's talk just a little bit about that. How do you find joy in your writing?
Thanks. That's such a great question, and I actually talked about this a little bit with Dennis Kalachi, who is another one of the co-authors in the Bamboo Dart Press lineup, and he's also one of the publishers. And what I keep on coming back to is my sort of creative origin story, which is I'm an only child, and so I spent huge amounts of time by myself playing. And I was playing with my dolls, and I somehow knew the story of Romeo and Juliet, probably from some cartoon. But so I'm playing Romeo and Juliet, and I've got my doll who's Juliet, and there's Romeo is outside. I live in an apartment, also, keep in mind. So Romeo is outside on the street, which in this case is 67th Street. And I'm thinking, she's saying, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, something, which I didn't quite understand, but like, he's out there, she's here. And I thought, this is terrible. Why is she up here when he's down there? She needs to get out. She needs to get out and go to him. So I threw my doll out the window because, and he's going to catch her. I've only lived on the third floor. It's going to be fun. So he's going to catch her and off they're going to go. And I remember I was so happy about this because it was like, solution, problem solved. And of course, there's a dark side to this, which explains a little bit sort of the darker side of my writing. As it happened, the doll fell onto the windowsill of my grandfather's workshop. My grandfather was a dress designer. He had a fancy showroom, but then he worked in the basement with three women at sewing machines, and they were sewing all the time. And he swore like a sailor. So swearing, sewing things. So the doll falls on the windowsill. of right where his sewing machine is. He doesn't notice, but my mother is talking to him. And my mother had eagle eyes and she saw the doll. And was I in trouble? Oh my God. She was so mad at me. Oh my goodness. So that's like, uh-oh. You know, I had this great thing and now, uh-oh. But that's sort of my creation. That's my creative origin story. I'm always thinking, how can we make this story different? You know, what's
Oh, that's right.
the way out? What's the way out? What's the escape? What's the move towards freedom? And to love, of course, you know, because Romeo and Juliet, you know, the ultimate love story. So, you know, how are we going to get there? And that, for just even talking about it, I feel this sense of, oh yeah, she's going to get out, and he's there waiting for her. He's going to catch her. And it's going to be great. Off they
You know,
go. Really
yeah,
go.
you reconceptualized Shakespeare, right? You said, well, screw all the convention, let's just jump.
Right, right,
That's
right.
great.
And they should be together. One of my favorite adaptations of Romeo and Juliet takes place in Nicholas Nickleby, the play, which is like 1,000,000 hours long. But there's a redo of Romeo and Juliet in the play that's performed.
Really?
And apparently this was a real thing that the Victorians did, because even the Victorians found Romeo and Juliet too depressing, which tells you something. And everybody hops up subsequently at the end. You know, Juliet, I was just sleeping, I'm fine. And Romeo jumps up, I'm fine. Tybalt jumps up, I'm fine. Everyone's fine at the end of the show. And I remember seeing that on stage and going, yes, completely unbelievable, but
Is it playing with convention for you then?
yes, yes.
Yeah,
I like playing with convention, and I like, again, thinking, how can we change the story to make it more interesting, to make it better, to make it, you know, we don't have to accept this script. We can
that's
change it, and how can we change it?
well, that's interesting because even narrow interiors is right. You're playing with classical convention, right? You're taking Basho's work and you're changing it up. And then there's Holbein. Was that a reference to Hans Holbein?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, okay. And so I'm thinking of his great painting of Henry VIII. And so if you're going to make an absolute despotic billionaire, that's not a
Right.
bad place to go. And so you're taking all those conventions and you're playing with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I don't do it in a structured way. I'm not an outliner. I'm actually a seat of my pants writer. And then I
Mhm.
go back and I try to clean it up and then I add layers onto it. But generally these things just kind of, again, it's the doll, sort of play around in my head and go on to the first draft. And then I try to get more organized. It's like, okay, okay, this part may not make sense. So how I'm going to shift it. That's kind of when the more serious work starts.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah. So it's more in the revision than the
Yeah.
creation.
Yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
during revision, I have to really kind of keep myself, remember remember throwing that doll out the window and how great that was? Remember that? Because the actual revision process, for me at least, is a slog.
Okay. Okay. I can say. Okay. So now I'm just going to advertise next month's Culturama, which is finding joy in revision.
I'll
So
be there. I need to take that class.
that's great. Okay, and I've started off this conversation, but if at any point anybody wants to ask questions, just jump in or whatever you like. And I know, Ken, you probably have 1,000 questions because you wrote that great review of this book.
No,
Uh,
thank you. And it was a great book to review. So you got to understand my background is a little bit different than any human being's background. Um, I came to writing and doing artwork a little later in life. And before that, I cleverly disguised as a psychologist and teacher. And so when I hit your book, Stephanie, it was like I figure you must have taught in continuation school, school alternative education for adolescents, because it was all there. I mean, all adolescence is a train wreck. I mean, it just that, but but yours really teases the nuance out of that. And, you know, that's a too easy generalization to make when the reality is usually just deeply convoluted. And now I was just so amazed at Gomer Faithcut and 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 his interminable searching. I mean, this kid, like all of us at 15, is a blind man in a dark room trying to find his way out. And that's just the name of the game for people that age. And you really did so well with that. I was wondering, you know, while I read it, and then while I wrote about it, and then while I read it some more, I was wondering, what was your 15-year-old experience?
Oh, well, thank you for that, Ken. That's such a great question. And thank you, before I go any further, thank you so much for that really beautiful review, which I thought wasn't just positive, but really understood what the book was about, which
Beautiful book.
I so appreciated. And I'm sort of smiling to myself as you're talking about the train wreck, because of course I've had a train wreck adolescence completely. Completely. I was a very tortured adolescent. 15 was a particularly bad year. So of course I picked that to be Gomer's bad summer, because I'm like, oh, that was awful. My father lost his job. I had some very concerning health issues. What else went wrong? The boyfriend who I was crazy about dumped me. So yeah, it was perfect. So that's absolutely there. But the other thing that happened, and that really arguably is the real grounding for the story, is that I, resolute non-athlete, everybody, just resolute non-athlete,
Went out for the swim team.
got my senior life-saving certificate.
Yes.
And it was one of these things it was a life changer.
Mhm.
I, again, as an only child of only children, did not have a large circle of people that I was physically intimate with. And life-saving is a very physically intimate thing, where you end up, particularly you're interacting, even when you're doing the testing, you're interacting with people you don't know really in a very physical way. So that was very different. And I guess the whole idea of physical strength and physical prowess that is not competitive,
Yeah.
but that is about saving people,
Yeah.
was an amazing way to rethink, again, physical fitness. And I embarked after that in a very different relationship with physical fitness because of that. And there was something just amazing about it. And one of the questions that keeps on coming up in the book and in other stuff that I've written actually is, when you want to rescue someone, particularly in life-saving, how much can you risk yourself? Well, we're told, and I think it's still what's being taught by the Red Cross, is you can't put yourself in danger. You can't put yourself in danger of drowning, because then you both drown. You have to do your best to save the person, but if you can't save them, you need to swim away from them. That's it. That's the bottom line.
Oh.
And that, again, for a kid whose life is a train wreck, was really, and continues to be, a very powerful lesson.
Wow.
That's fascinating. Wow.
Good work.
Yeah. Does that become a metaphor of the book? He by the end he doesn't really do anything for Christopher. Not that he can, but also he probably shouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's how I think about it for him, and realizing that it's not a happy realization, of course. I can't, I love this person, but I can't save them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think everybody in the Zoom room knows that there are situations where that happens.
Absolutely.
And where you have to say, okay, I can't do anything. But I need to figure out what I need to do to live my life, to go forward.
You know what else I found really fascinating about it is you chose as your protagonist a 15-year-old. Uh, uh, he's not quite sure, but it seems like he's a gay person, right? Which is not who you are. You're not a 15-year-old boy, and
Right.
you know, how,
And I
but
don't identify as queer. No, that's absolutely true. Yes, his I'm not sure, and again, this was what's sort of wonderful about writing, is that you create these characters, but then they become their own thing. They become their own people, and you don't know them completely because they've become their own identity, entity. So I'm not sure what his orientation is. I think he thinks he's probably bisexual, but he's not sure. Um, and you make a great point. I do identify as straight. I am married to a man, have been married to the same man for years. I do think, though, when we think about spectra and gender identification and orientation, I would say I'm somewhat male identified, somewhat in terms of behavior and in terms of how I interact with people. I'm very comfortable with men. Um, and I also think, to be honest, that had I not been a boomer who had been very, very carefully kind of, I want to say brainwashed is the word that leaps to mind, which is probably not the best word, but really socialized to be heterosexual. I think particularly as an adolescent, was at the very least bi-curious, if not more.
so it gives you a way of exploring that aspect of your young life.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
interesting.
Absolutely.
Well, it
You
gives
certainly,
you, excuse me, it also gives you a great perspective on being human. Carl Jung says that, men have a woman inside them as a central part of them, and women have a central part of themselves that's male, and by that I think he means stereotypic set of reactions and reflexes. And yet, you take being 15, and it's kind of, that is ambivalence incarnate,
mhm.
being 15. And so it's perfect for this person. You could have had poor Gomer be in a woman's body
True.
just as easily, and it'd still be Gomer.
Right, right. I think
Yeah.
that's a great point to talk about Jung, and I certainly think one of the wonderful things that's happened, and I feel so grateful to my trans and particularly non-binary writing compatriots who really opened up that sense of, thinking in terms of male and female, masculine, feminine only. It's pretty limiting. And
Yeah.
things don't exactly play out that way, do they? And I think that's such an interesting and exciting way to think about, for us writers to think about character.
Mhm.
So we're a group of writers here, so I'm going to ask you some questions for writers, and I think that's a great place to start. And so the first place is when writing, coming up with a point of view, you don't necessarily always want to have exactly your own point of view. So how should writers go about that?
Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot, particularly in the wake of the political work that my husband and I have been involved with, and particularly in light of the political struggles going on in our country over particularly the past 4 years, but generally for years and years. And I'm thinking about a wonderful comment that Tananarive Due made at the Whidbey Island Writers Workshop. Tananarive is a Black writer, female writer. She writes mysteries, but she was talking about how to write diverse characters. And she said, well, you want to write more diverse characters, but in order to do that, you have to lead a diverse life. Do you?
Hmm.
And she asked this question, I want to say 8 years ago, but it's really stuck with me. And it challenged me to get to know more folks of color, to get to know more Muslim folks, to get to know more folks who aren't like me. And I think that is kind of job number one, I think, particularly for white writers, if you have any kind of privilege, and certainly straight white Christian writers, is to get to know other kinds of people.
Mhm.
Because you can't write about people different from you unless you've encountered them.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's job number one. Job number two is, if you're going to write about folks who are different than you, and good for you if you are, then you maybe want to, we were talking about this earlier in terms of workshop, you want to workshop your work with people who aren't like you too, also, so that you can get a sense, well, how is what I'm saying, how is what I'm writing landing? And I feel very grateful. One of the writers who I've worked with pretty intensively on my most recent work is Neil Aitken. Well, Neil speaks fluent Mandarin. His mom, I think, is Chinese. His father is white. So he was a great person to run by the Gomer Faithcut character.
Yeah.
And I've, in the sequel to The Puppet Turners, which I'm currently shopping, I actually turned to him because I have a number of writers of color in that book. And so we really tried to talk some of those issues through.
Okay, that's great. Is there a limit? Is there, you can go thus far but no farther when writing about people other than yourself?
That's a wonderful question. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a very alive question. And I don't know.
Okay, that's great. How do writers find joy in their work?
I think that's a wonderful question. And I'm going to do a little plug for a book that I think some of you have seen me talk about before. This is just an amazing journal workbook by Kamari Carter Hawkins. And it's Good Morning to the Person You Want to Be. Introduce yourself. Who are you? And it goes from there. And it's really a journaling workbook about kind of, Ken's going to know that, getting back in touch with yourself, or for some of us, getting in touch with ourselves for the first time, because for some of us, it really takes a long time to do it the first time around. And it's a fantastic kind of set of exercises. And I think, for starters, I think sometimes for a lot of us, going for joy feels like a very tall order. So what I try to go for is astonishment.
Hmm.
And if that feels too hard, and maybe it is, I go for, what do I notice? Let me just notice things.
That's very mindful.
Yeah, and that's, again, I've recently started meditating, and I kind of hate meditating, frankly. It's really hard. But what's good about it is that it makes you notice things. And one of the astonishing things that I learned like last week was, when you inhale, how cold the air is here in any of it. It's maybe hot where you guys are, but it's really cold going in. And I'm like, oh, that's so weird. That's so interesting. So I kind of go to this sort of very basic, what am I noticing? And then generally I can build out, not so much build out, but it kind of happens. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so I might just start quick firing questions at you here. So you're working with links that you're working with traditional links, but you're working with non-traditional links of works. And so you've got novels, you've got poetry collections, but you also have flash fiction, and this is a novella. What does the novella give to you that no other length can give to you?
Yeah. Well, I really seem to be someone, and this may not be true for all of you, but this is certainly true for me. I seem to work better in shorter forms. I don't know why that is, but the process of going and then having to really compress it works for me. My writing gets better. And I may radically compress and then blow things up a little bit more, but somehow doing the big first draft and then going, it enables me to see things and see opportunities and options in the writing that I can't see otherwise. I find that, back to joy, I find that compression, I do find it pleasurable to do. The rescue plan was longer in one of its earlier drafts. And when I was talking to Mark Givens about the project, he gave me a word count and I was like, ooh, okay, I'm gonna have to cut to get down to that. And seeing where that could happen, but not have it destroy the story, was fun for me. And that's, I mean, back to revising. Thank you so much for that question, because now when I revise, I can go, oh yeah, but I like this part. I like this part. I like the cutting out part, actually. That's a very pleasurable thing. And I think that pleasurable feeling, again, enables me to say, oh yeah, this is great. Oh, but what about this? There's a particular section at the end of Rescue Plan, actually, where it's just one of the later drafts. I cut it way down and I went, oh, this needs to happen now. And I had not seen that until, the space had been cleared.
Yeah. So it's almost not so much the length of the novella, it's pushing it back to the length of the novella that does it.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Is there anything about the length of flash fiction that captures your consciousness?
Oh, well, flash fiction was great and was the wonderful way for me to step out of poetry making into telling a story. And again, poets out there, I know I know you feel this way. It's like, I'm a poet, but oh my gosh, I don't want to tell a story. I don't know how to tell a story. It's going to be War and Peace. It's going to be, or it has to be the Fast and the Furious with multiple explosions and, car wrecks. And I don't know how to do that. And flash fiction is great because very little has to happen. And it just has to be one thing, so you drive that car one time to the bank and rob the bank and leave, and that's it. You don't need anything else. So it's a wonderful step outward for poets. So it was perfect for me in that sense. The first flash fiction piece that I published was actually right after 9/11. And was based on a true story that I read in the newspaper about a man who was a gardener. Do I garden? I do not. Do I know anything about gardening? I do not. But I loved that story and the idea of this man gardening, trying to grow something after the horror that was 9/11. And so my first story, the first published story, is him planting bulbs with his granddaughter. That's it. I had to do research about bulbs. I don't know I know vaguely what a bulb is, but I had to do all this research to figure out how to say that. And that was fun. It was like, oh, that's what you do. That's how you describe what you do with the bulbs. And, but it was a lovely move for me because it's quite lyrical. And small, but there you go. But that's what flash fiction is, or that's what flash fiction can be, certainly. So
it does. It makes me think of we were talking about this in a different context, but my favorite 9/11 story, I don't know if that's the right way of saying it because it's such a tragic event, but Brian Doyle's flash fiction piece is just so affecting. It's incredibly powerful. If you've never read Brian Doyle's, I can't remember the name of it. It's about the people falling out of the buildings. It's extraordinary. And we were talking about Ghost Pepper just made reference to the fact that this is the second time we talked about Fast and Furious, and today. Yeah, and we're talking about what. Actually, I was making a point about why Baby Driver works instead of and Fast and Furious doesn't really work in terms of a car chase, and it's all about tension. It's about it was tied. This is now I'm going farther and farther back. Tied to what you have to do in terms of a novel in the first few pages, and what it means to make a contract with your reader, and how it is that you do that. Do you have anything to tell us about that? How do you make a contract with your reader?
I'm going to share. I'm just going to crib what my wonderful teacher Amy Bender says about that, and that is, we will put up with anything as readers. We'll put up with anything if we're grounded in the world, and that's the contract. Put us in the world. We need the five senses. We need to be there as fully as possible. And if we're there, you're good.
Is that how you start your novel then?
Yes, and that's part of the reason why I like to use. I was talking about Il Faut, which is the name of the first story that I published. It's from Voltaire. We must cultivate our garden, which in French starts off with Il faut cultiver notre jardin. Is I like these physical movements because they ground me in the story. So we've got the gardener planting the bulbs with his granddaughter, and of course in Rescue Plan we've got the whole prospect and practicing for the life-saving exam.
That's great.
Physical movements and situations are always great. I find wonderful, because then I can just work on kind of getting you in that mode so you feel that and experience that, and then I figure it's pretty smooth sailing from there on out.
Okay. You just brought up a question for me, something I really appreciate about your writing. It's that, for years and years and years, you were a fancy pants academic. You know 23 languages or something, and you make reference to all this classical literature. And I love that you're unafraid of that, and you're able to make those fancy pants references. But I also love that you're able to make the more contemporary, grounded in popular culture that we're all available. It's available to all of us, which to me feels very much a postmodern move. And I'm wondering about your feelings about reference and fancy pants reference and non-fancy pants reference.
I'm glad I wore my fancy corduroy pants. I should back up so you can see them. See? Fancy that's my pants, you guys, because you're important. So thank you so much for that. And you've just made my day with that question, because I've worked really hard to get to the place where I can talk about Voltaire and Hans Holbein, but still write to, like a regular person. And that took a long time to get to. I was, just for folks who I'm meeting for the first time, I was trained as a comparative lit scholar, and I spent years doing that kind of work. Doing scholarship. My specialty is the 18th century, which is why I know about Voltaire. I also worked on postmodern authors like the Austrian writer Peter Handke, who won the Nobel Prize, very controversial writer, and justifiably controversial. So I love that wonky stuff. But I, as a teacher at a public university, was always very aware of this huge chasm between, that stuff and talking about that stuff, with academics, and the students who I worked with, who were brilliant, but who didn't talk like that and weren't necessarily interested in ever learning to talk like that. So that in a lot of my writing, I'm trying to bridge that gap. And it took me, as someone trained to write in a really complicated way, it took me actually a long time to learn how to write like a regular person. And I want to credit the author Todd Goldberg with being a really, really important teacher. I wrote the first novel that I wrote that I was not able to publish, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because it was pretty weird, even by my standards. I remember he looked at a draft, and he's such a lovely person. He said, Stephanie, you got to realize something. Readers are really stupid. That's not true, by the way. But he said it to me in a way that I could hear. Readers are really stupid. So could you please make it easier for us to understand? And it took me years to realize that, of course, what he was saying is you're incredibly pretentious. I personally can't stand to read what you're writing, but I like you. So make the sentences shorter, and let's maybe refer to one famous author per work, not 50. And the thing that I've really learned most recently with Rescue Plan, and I feel very grateful, not just to Mark and Dennis, but to you, John, because you're someone who has deep ideas, but you write like a regular person. I'm realizing that actually the best stories are often the most structurally straightforward stories. At least for me. And I think about the stories that I love most. For example, the wonderful Saffron Foer book about we seem to be talking about 9/11 today. What is it? Incredibly Loud and Extremely Close. It's one of my favorite books ever. And it's really, the writing is complex and the character is complex. Oscar, who's a young boy. But the story is quite straightforward. The story is a quest to find the lock for a key, the missing lock for a key. He has the key, but he doesn't know what it unlocks. That's the whole book. And it's 9/11 is in it, and World War II is in it. I mean, it's huge scope, but the story itself is very, very simple. And I think for me, that's something that I think I finally internalized with Rescue Plan, because the trajectory of the story is actually pretty simple. It too is a quest, and it has certain, and a test and a ritual death and a descent, and it has all of these things in it. But then what I bring to it is my own little weird worldview.
Yeah, so it is very much that thing that Bonnie always talks about, which is scene goal, and it's character, desire, conflict, and that kind of thing. And the brilliance comes in achieving the sorts of things.
Yeah, and I'm going to just leap on to that and again share with people who are thinking about writing fiction or struggling to write fiction, and worrying about it. And I worried about this aspect a lot, which, oh my God, my story isn't original. We're back to the Fast and the Furious, I guess, and Baby Driver, which I also really liked. Oh my gosh, my story has to be original. And the answer is the plot doesn't have to be original, actually. Because we got the St. Romeo and Juliet, we got these, the Odyssey, we got these stories, and they've been around for millennia, maybe longer. But what's original is what we put into it, is what we think is interesting, our weird obsessions, our 15-year-old mess that we're now able to write about. That's the original part. So I would tell people, don't worry so much about the plot. The plot needs to work and it needs to make sense. And you need to get characters from point A to point B. You got to do that. But after that, it's all you. It's all your stuff and your ideas.
So you're coming back to what Christopher Booker said in 7 Basic Plots, which is that there are 7 basic plots, and that's it.
Oh, I'm glad to know there's 7. I think there may be like 2.
Yeah. Then you're coming down to monomyth, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Again, I've been jibber jabbering because that's what I do. Does anybody else have any questions that you'd like to follow up, Stephanie?
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat. While you're thinking, I saw Ghost Pepper say something about how Seattle was a very segregated city despite its diversity, and I would agree with that entirely. I think that's really true. It's a strange city in that sense, and I'm not from Seattle, although I have relatives who are from there, who and used to go to Seattle to visit. And speaking of haunted places, narrow interior is a haunted town. Seattle seems like a pretty haunted city to me in terms of racial injustice, and I feel like I'm just beginning to kind of get a little bit of a sense for what some of that history is about. So thank you for that share. I think it's important. Oh, here's one from Steve. Please talk a little bit about the water woman in the shower. This is a woman who appears in the showers at the swim gym, like they do. I mean, haven't you all seen spirits in the swim gym? I mean, come on. If not, you're not paying attention. I'm kidding, kind of. She is a person from this book, which is my first novel, and it's a novel in a series about this town, about Narrow Interior. The sequel, I'm shopping the sequel. If you know anybody who I couldn't talk to about publishing it, please let me know. And then I'm working on another book. I've made some notes for another book that talks about the prehistory. Narrow Interior is the town of a quasi-forgotten religion, which is a mixture of Anabaptism, the Mennonites, and the Pennsylvania Dutch, who are actually the Pennsylvania Deutsch, are German, is a sort of combination of Anabaptism, Shinto, and other religious influences. How that came to be is talked about a little bit in The Puppet Turners, and it will get explored more in other books. But the woman that you saw in the shower is one of the leaders of that religion. I'm trying to say enough, but not say too much.
And so
I'm glad you found her interesting. She's a pretty interesting character. I agree.
This works kind of globally in your series, but also individually in this one story. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, she just keeps on appearing, as unresolved histories do.
That is
Collectively, they just keep coming back. When in some place where you don't expect to see them, it's like, oh, what's that doing here?
Oh, that's interesting. That's that's the kind of move you can make if you are a comparative lit professor at UCR, right? You bring in all of these influences, which I think is just absolutely wonderful. I'm wondering, would you mind? Is there a part that you'd like to read from the book?
Sure. What I think I'm going to do is I think I'll just read you the very beginning. Since it's such a compressed story, I think reading something from the middle is going to be confusing. So here's the first here are the first couple of pages. Gomer Faithcutt liked swimming. The feeling of weightlessness, the power to do things he could never do on the ground, somersaults, back and front, handstands, and dives from the highest board. Then he had started learning to save people from drowning a year ago, last spring. He completed the classwork for junior lifeguard and had even taken the written test. Then he got brain cancer. Now he would finish this summer at the Narrow Interior Municipal Pool. Going to the pool, Mackie texted him. She was one of his best friends, a girl. He didn't answer because the truth was he preferred walking to the pool alone. He liked thinking about what he was going to see there. All winter, the water polo team from the high school up at Amherst had been using the pool for practice. And these boys were tall and powerful, and their legs were muscled to the point of ropiness. And grown-up guys came too, policemen and firefighters from Narrow Interior. They used the pool for strength training and for relaxation. The way those bodies moved through space with ease and knowledge. He wanted to be close to bodies like that. Gomer knew what coming out was. He had taken the sex ed classes, and there were gay people in his town, but they tended to come for the weekends and the summer because they had jobs in the city. They were rich gay people, in other words, and he went to public school, and local people were different. And no, he couldn't tell his father. He'd gotten a sense for what could go wrong with that telling when he saw that old X-Men movie where the ice kid tries to tell his parents he can freeze stuff. People say they want to know things, but in the end, they don't want to know what they think they do. He knew too about the queer kids who committed suicide. He was only 15, but he wasn't an idiot. He wasn't going to offer himself up to Mr. Death just yet. His cancer had almost killed him once. The plan was stay silent, survive. Did Mackie know? He suspected she suspected. She would almost say, dude, that's so gay, and then catch herself. But there was another reason he was interested in the pool. There was something else in the showers, a woman. That seemed strange, given what his proclivities almost certainly were. And yes, he knew the word proclivities. He was really smart. But because of his illness, he did not skip 9th grade. Thank God. He was already shorter and skinnier than a lot of the boys in his class. He could not have faced 11th grade this past year. Bad enough it was coming up in September. But yes, he'd seen a woman standing under the shower, a woman who had long hair, wearing a long gray dress. She was almost a trick of the water, the fluorescence shining oddly on the tile. My name is Molly, the almost water woman whispered in the spray of droplets, unless that was the old pipes whistling through the swim gym building. Mackie texted him again. Pool? Okay, stop there. Hopefully that'll give you a little sense of what the book is about.
That's fantastic. And talk about setting up a contract with your reader. Right, we've got that ghost right at the beginning. We've got all this stuff going on. That's really wonderful. We've got just a couple of minutes. If anybody has any questions, and okay. So let's go with Marta.
Sorry, this may have been covered before. I have constant interruptions today, unfortunately. But did anybody cover how we get an autographed and inscribed copy of the book?
We haven't. That's a good question.
What we have not, but you know what? I'm waiting for my shipment of books. I was so happy to see John, show his copy because I haven't seen the actual physical book yet. I'm waiting for my box of books to come. But Marta, once they come, I'll let you know, and I'll set you up with an autographed copy, of course. Thanks.
Yay! Okay, good.
I really appreciate
It's really lovely.
Yeah,
It's well done.
I was just able to order it from the publisher, so it's up and ready to go.
it. Yay!
Yeah.
I love your letter, by the way. Wow, that's beautiful.
But it wasn't autographed and inscribed. That's what I need.
That's great. Okay, so I'm going to ask a really amorphous question here, which is this. You've got a group of writers here. What's your best advice for writers?
Best advice. Well, try to write every day if you can. Try to journal. Again, people have love-hate relationships with journaling. I get it. And I certainly do. Sometimes I can't believe I have to journal. I don't want to do it. But if you hate journaling, open up a Word doc or whatever word processing program you have, open up a document and do the Marvin Bell of blessed memory routine. Is you pull the ruler over in your document so it looks a little bit like whatever you write is going to be a poem. So pull it over here and then type 10 lines. Save your work, leave it, go have breakfast or take a break, come back and sit down and say, I can write something because I've already started. I'm not starting, I'm just continuing. And that sounds nutty, but it really works.
Fantastic. That's great. I mean, we said earlier, the hardest part about exercising is putting on your gym shoes. Once you've done that, you're off and going.
Can I share one more thing?
Please.
Because this is Bonnie Hearn Hill's fantastic observation, which is, you know, if you keep working on writing, you're going to get better. You're not going to get worse. You're going to get better. Back to John running around the field 100 times. You're going to become a better writer. It's going to happen. So why not?
That's great. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing February Culturama with us.
You bet. Thank you so much. It was so fun. So great to see all of you. I'm applauding all of you in this odd way that we do.
All right, thank you.